Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty cool story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. So get cozy, enjoy it, and watch it till the end, guys.
There are secrets in the Imperium of man that can shatter minds with their mere utterance. There are truths so dangerous that to speak them aloud is to invite damnation upon all who listen. And then there are the Grey Knights, warriors who embody both the secret and the keeper, soldiers who fight battles that history will never record, heroes whose names will never be spoken beyond the obsidian walls of their fortress monastery on Titan. They are forbidden from speaking of their missions, not because their superiors demand silence, but because the very nature of what they face makes secrecy an act of salvation rather than suppression. To understand why these silver-armored giants must remain veiled in shadow, we must first comprehend what it means to fight against forces that exist beyond the boundaries of human comprehension. We must understand that sometimes the greatest service one can offer to humanity is to bear witness alone, to carry memories too terrible for mortal minds, and to die with those memories locked away forever in tombs beneath Saturn's largest moon. This is the story of why the Grey Knights are forbidden to speak. It is a story written in mind wipes and executions, in purges and protocols, in the cold mathematics of survival that weighs millions of lives against the potential corruption of billions. It is a story that asks whether ignorance truly is bliss, or whether it is simply the price we pay for another day of existence in a galaxy that wants nothing more than to devour our souls. The birth in shadow. In the final days of the Horus Heresy, when brother fought against brother and the very fabric of the Imperium threatened to tear itself apart, the Emperor of mankind looked into the future and saw something that filled even his ancient heart with dread. He saw that the war against his favored son would end, yes, but at a cost so terrible that he himself would be unable to continue defending humanity from the true threat that lurked behind the rebellion. The Chaos Gods, those malevolent entities that dwelt in the roiling madness of the warp, had orchestrated the entire heresy. And when it was done, when Horus lay dead and the Emperor sat broken upon his golden throne, there would be no one with the knowledge and power necessary to continue the fight against daemonkind. So the Emperor made a plan. In the deepest vaults beneath the Imperial Palace, hidden from even the watchful eyes of his traitorous sons, he met with his most trusted advisor, Malcador the Sigillite. The ancient psyker, whose origins remained a mystery even to those closest to him, had served the Emperor since the Unification Wars. He had been regent during the Great Crusade, administrator of the Imperium's vast bureaucracy, and keeper of secrets too numerous to count. Now, he would be given perhaps the most important task of his long and storied existence. Malcador was tasked with finding 12 individuals worthy of carrying the weight of humanity's future upon their shoulders. 4 would be mortal lords and administrators, men and women of unshakable will and keen minds, whose task would be to establish a new organization dedicated to rooting out the corruption of chaos from within the Imperium itself. They would become the founders of the Inquisition, that most secretive and powerful of imperial institutions. But it is the other 8 that concern us here, for they would become something else entirely. The 8 space marines that Malcador gathered came from disparate sources. Some were knights errant, those loyal warriors who had served Malcador directly throughout the heresy as his personal agents and investigators. Names that would echo through the millennia, though never spoken aloud beyond the halls of Titan. Nathaniel Garrow, formerly of the Death Guard; Garviel Loken, who had survived the treachery on Istvan III; Amandera Kendall, whose quiet service had gone unnoticed by most. Others came from legions that had remained loyal, their names and deeds known only to the Emperor and his regent. What made these 8 special was not merely their martial prowess or their tactical acumen, though both were considerable. It was their absolute incorruptibility in the face of chaos. Several of them came from traitor legions, yet had remained loyal when their primarchs and battle brothers had fallen to the ruinous powers. This was proof, if proof were needed, that their faith in the Emperor transcended even the bonds of genetic lineage and fraternal loyalty that typically bound a space marine to his legion. They had looked into the abyss of corruption and turned away. They had heard the whispers of the dark gods and rejected their promises of power and glory. When the Emperor looked upon the 12 that Malcador had assembled, he spoke words that would set in motion 10,000 years of secret warfare. "Malcador, you have judged well," he said, his voice carrying the weight of divinity and ancient wisdom. "These 8 space marines do indeed have a vital role to play in the future of the Imperium. Though veiled in secrecy, will they be. Veiled in secrecy. Even from the beginning, even in those first moments of their founding, the Grey Knights were to be shrouded in shadow. The Emperor knew that what they would face, the knowledge they would acquire, the horrors they would witness, could not be allowed to spread throughout the wider Imperium. For to know of demons was to invite their attention, to speak their names was to give them power, to understand the true nature of chaos was to take the first step toward corruption. Malcador took the 8 space marines to Saturn's largest moon, a barren rock called Titan that orbited the ringed gas giant like a silent sentinel. Through means both mystical and technological, the Emperor had prepared a fortress monastery there, carved deep into the moon's basalt heart. It was already provisioned with everything necessary to create a new chapter of Space Marines. Gene Seed waited in stasis vaults, its origin a mystery we shall explore in depth. Armories stood ready with weapons forged specifically to combat demonic entities. Libraries contained knowledge of the warp and its denizens that would drive mortal men to madness. But perhaps most importantly, the fortress was already populated with hundreds upon hundreds of recruits. Some were raw and untrained, young psychers gathered from across the galaxy whose potential had marked them for either greatness or damnation. Others had been selected in secret from the ranks of loyalist legions, warriors whose psychic gifts and incorruptible spirits made them ideal candidates for this new brotherhood. They waited on Titan like seeds planted in fertile soil, ready to be shaped into something the galaxy had never seen before. Malcador could not stay. The siege of terror was beginning, and his master needed him. So he appointed one of the 8 original Space Marines to lead this nascent chapter. His name was Janus, and he would become the first Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights. The legends that surround Janus are as numerous as the stars themselves, each one more fantastical than the last. Some whisper that he was Magnus the Red in disguise, the Crimson King seeking redemption for his fall to chaos. Others claim he was a fragment of the Emperor's own soul given human form. The truth, like so many things about the Grey Knights, remains hidden behind layers of secrecy and myth. Before Malcador left Titan to return to Terra and his final fate, he performed one last act of unprecedented psychic power. He wove a complex ward around the entire moon, a bubble of reality that would protect it from the chaos engulfing the galaxy. But he did more than merely hide Titan. He sent it into the warp itself, cast it into that realm of madness and nightmare where reality held no meaning, and time flowed like water through desperate fingers. For the 8 original Grey Knights and their hundreds of recruits, subjective decades passed in that terrible place. They trained in arts of war that no other Space Marines had ever learned. They studied forbidden texts that catalogued every known daemon prince and greater daemon, memorizing true names and banishment rituals that could send these entities screaming back into the void. They learned to channel their psychic powers into protective wards called the Aegis, shields of absolute faith and purity that would make their very presence anathema to creatures of the warp. They became something more than Space Marines, something unique in all the galaxy's long and bloody history. When Titan finally emerged from the warp and returned to real space, the Horus heresy was over. The Emperor sat entombed upon his golden throne, forever vigilant but unable to speak or act directly in the material realm. Malcador had sacrificed himself to buy the Emperor those precious moments needed to strike down Horus. And the 4 mortal lords Malcador had chosen now led the Inquisition, that secret police force tasked with rooting out heresy in all its forms. The timing was impeccable, though whether by design or cosmic coincidence, none could say. The second founding was underway, the great legions being broken down into smaller chapters as decreed by the Codex Astartes. In the administrative chaos of that reorganization, with hundreds of new chapters being created and designated, the Inquisition quietly added one more name to the roster. Chapter 666, they called it, though at that time, barely 400 chapters had been officially commissioned. The number was deliberately chosen, pregnant with symbolism that only a select few would understand. But the Grey Knights who emerged from Titan's warp sojourn were not 8 warriors and hundreds of recruits. Time had passed differently in that hell realm, and what returned was a full chapter of 1,000 battle brothers, each one a proven warrior and accomplished psyker. They had been forged in conditions that would have broken lesser men. They had stared into the heart of chaos itself and remained pure. They were ready for their sacred purpose. From that day forward, the Grey Knights would serve as the chamber militant of the Ordo Malleus, the demon-hunting branch of the Inquisition. They would fight battles that could never be spoken of against enemies whose very existence was a secret worth killing to protect. And they would do so in absolute silence, known only to the highest echelons of imperial leadership and the inquisitors they served. The secrecy was built into their foundation from the very beginning. It was not an afterthought or a convenient policy decision. It was fundamental to their purpose, as essential to their function as their weapons or their armor. For the Grey Knights were created to fight a war that humanity could not be allowed to know was being waged. They were the defenders against an enemy that grew stronger with each mind that acknowledged its existence. They were warriors whose greatest victories would be measured not in glory or honor, but in the continued ignorance of those they protected. The Emperor's legacy. Written in flesh. There is something that sets the Grey Knights apart from every other chapter of Space Marines in the Imperium. It is not their psychic abilities, for other chapters maintain librarians who wield the powers of the warp. It is not their specialized equipment or their tactics, for the Death Watch and other chapters have their own unique war gear and methods. No, what truly makes the Grey Knights different lies in the very genetic code that transforms their recruits from mortal boys into transhuman warriors. It is written in their gene seed, that most precious of all substances in the Imperium. And it is this difference that makes their secrecy not merely prudent, but absolutely essential. Most Space Marine chapters trace their lineage back to one of the 20 Primarchs, those godlike beings created by the Emperor as templates for his armies. The Ultramarines carry the gene seed of Robert Guilliman, the Blood Angels that of Sanguinius, the Dark Angels that of Lion L. Johnson. Each Primarch's genetic legacy carries with it certain strengths and certain flaws, quirks of biology and psychology that mark their sons across the millennia. The Blood Angels struggle with the Black Rage and the Red Thirst, genetic curses born from their Primarch's death. The Space Wolves bear the Canis Helix, that peculiar strand of DNA that grants them enhanced senses but risks transformation into bestial wolfen. Each chapter bears the mark of its genetic father, for better or worse. But the Grey Knights have no Primarch. Their gene seed comes from an older, purer source. According to their most sacred and closely guarded texts, the gene seed used to create the Grey Knights was crafted directly from the genome of the Emperor himself, not filtered through the biology of a Primarch, not tempered by the particular traits and personality of one of his sons, but pure and undiluted from the master of mankind. The codices speak of gene seed without the flaws of those that had gone before and which carried the gift of the Emperor's own flesh and soul. This is not merely symbolic language or chapter mythology. The implications of this genetic heritage are staggering. The Emperor was the most powerful human psyker who ever lived, a being whose origins stretched back to the darkest depths of human prehistory, who had walked among mankind for tens of thousands of years before revealing himself during the Unification Wars. If the Grey Knights truly carry his genetic legacy, then they are in some sense his direct sons, in a way that even the Primarchs were not. And this explains so much about them. It explains their incorruptibility, that unprecedented and statistically impossible resistance to the lure of chaos. In 10,000 years of constant warfare against the ruinous powers, not a single Grey Knight has ever fallen to corruption. Not one has succumbed to the whispers of demons or the promises of the dark gods. This perfect record defies all probability, all logic, all expectation. Inquisitors and scholars have written countless treatises attempting to explain how this can be, how mere transhuman warriors can resist temptations that brought down even the Primarchs themselves. Some argue that it is the constant reaffirmation of faith and purity, the rigorous training and indoctrination that every Grey Knight undergoes. Others point to the specialized equipment they carry: armor inscribed with hexagrammic wards and weapons that channel psychic energy into demon-slaying force. Still others suggest that the Emperor's will somehow protects them even from his throne on Terra, that his divine power shields his genetic sons from corruption, even as he shields humanity from the predations of the warp. But the simplest explanation is the one written in their very cells. The Emperor was incorruptible. His gene seed makes them incorruptible. It is that direct, that fundamental, that absolute. Yet this blessing is also the reason for their secrecy. For if the truth about the Grey Knight's genetic heritage were to become widely known, it would raise questions that the Imperium is not prepared to answer. If the Emperor could create incorruptible gene seed, why did he not use it for all his Space Marines from the beginning? Why did he allow Primarchs and Legions to carry genetic flaws that would eventually contribute to their fall? These questions lead to uncomfortable truths about the nature of the Great Crusade and the Emperor's long-term plans for humanity. More practically, the knowledge that there exists gene seed immune to chaos corruption would make the Grey Knights targets for every demon prince and sorcerer in the galaxy. Imagine what the Chaos Gods themselves might do to get their claws on even a single strand of that genetic material. Could they study it, find weaknesses in it, develop methods to corrupt it despite its purity? Could they pervert it, twist it into something that served their purposes rather than opposing them? The mere possibility is too terrible to contemplate, and so the secret must be kept. There is another aspect to their genetic legacy that makes secrecy necessary. Every Grey Knight is a psyker. Not some of them, not a dedicated librarius like other chapters maintain, but every single battle brother. From the newest initiate to the Supreme Grand Master himself, all of them can wield the powers of the warp, channel psychic energy, and manifest their will upon reality itself. This universal psychic ability is part of their genetic heritage, a reflection of the Emperor's own tremendous psychic might. But psychic power is both a weapon and a vulnerability. Psykers are beacons in the warp, their souls burning brighter than those of normal humans, drawing the attention of hungry entities that prowl that terrible realm. The more powerful the psyker, the brighter they shine, the more attractive they become to demons and other warp predators. An entire chapter of powerful combat psykers represents a feast beyond measure to the denizens of the Imperium. The Grey Knights have learned to channel their psychic might into the Aegis, that protective ward that shields them from demonic influence and makes their presence painful to creatures of the warp. But this protection works best when they can surprise their enemies, when demons do not know they are coming, until silver armor and blessed blades are already tearing through unholy flesh. If knowledge of the Grey Knights were widespread, if every demon prince and sorcerer knew of their existence and capabilities, those enemies could prepare specific countermeasures, develop strategies to overcome the Aegis, set traps designed to exploit the very psychic abilities that make the Grey Knights so formidable. Secrecy, then, is not merely about protecting the Imperium from dangerous knowledge. It is about protecting the Grey Knights themselves, preserving their tactical advantage, ensuring that when they do strike against the forces of chaos, they do so with the element of surprise on their side. An enemy who does not know you exist cannot prepare defenses against you. An enemy who does not understand your capabilities cannot develop tactics to counter them. The Grey Knight's invisibility is itself a weapon, as potent as any force sword or storm bolter. Consider what happens when a Grey Knight falls in battle. Their bodies are recovered at all costs, brought back to Titan to lie in the crypts beneath the citadel. But more importantly, their gene seed is harvested by apothecaries, those precious progenoid glands that contain the genetic template necessary to create new Grey Knights. This gene seed is irreplaceable, unique in all the galaxy. If even one set of progenoids were to fall into enemy hands, if chaos forces were to capture and study them, the consequences could be catastrophic. This makes every Grey Knight battle a high-stakes affair where the primary objective is not merely victory, but total annihilation of the enemy and absolute recovery of all Grey Knight casualties. When they fight to leave no witnesses, no survivors who might report what they saw, no genetic material that might be salvaged from the battlefield. This is why their missions are so often followed by extensive purges. It is why those who fight alongside them are so frequently mind-wiped or executed. The protection of the gene seed requires such measures, no matter how brutal they might seem. The Emperor's legacy written in the Grey Knight's genetic code is both their greatest strength and their deepest vulnerability. It makes them proof against the corruption that has claimed so many other warriors. It grants them power to match the worst horrors the warp can spawn. But it also makes them treasures beyond price, walking repositories of genetic information that must be protected at all costs. Their secrecy is not optional. It is not a choice made by cautious administrators or paranoid inquisitors. It is a fundamental necessity, dictated by the very nature of what they are. And so they fight in silence, these sons of the Emperor. They carry his genetic legacy into battle against the forces that would devour humanity's soul. And they do so knowing that their deeds will never be celebrated, their names never spoken beyond the walls of their fortress. It is a lonely burden, made lonelier still by the knowledge that even those they save must never know they were in danger. But it is a burden they bear willingly, for they understand the price of their existence and the necessity of their anonymity. The corruption that knowledge brings. There is a fundamental truth about chaos that most citizens of the Imperium are blessedly ignorant of. A truth so dangerous that the Inquisition wages a constant war to keep it from spreading. To know of chaos is to begin the process of corruption. To learn the true names of the dark gods is to invite their attention. To witness a demon's manifestation in real space is to create a connection between your soul and the warp that can never be fully severed. Knowledge is not power in this context. Knowledge is poison, seeping slowly through the mind and soul, transforming the knower into something that serves the very entities they sought to understand. This is why the Emperor decreed, before the start of the Great Crusade, that the existence of chaos and its demonic servants was to remain hidden from all but a select few. This is why the Imperium's official stance on such matters is one of absolute denial. There are no gods in the warp, only Xenos predators and psychic phenomena. There are no demons, only warp entities that have been given false animation by mankind's superstitions and fears. The Lectitio Divinitatis and the Imperial Creed speak of the Emperor's divine light protecting humanity, but they do not speak of what that light protects against, for to name the darkness is to give it substance. Consider what happens when an ordinary human encounters a demon for the first time. Their minds are not prepared for what they see. the human brain evolved to process natural threats, predators, and environmental hazards that follow logical rules and physical laws. But demons do not follow such rules. They are emotion given form, nightmare made flesh, concepts and feelings dragged kicking and screaming from the warp and forced into shapes that make a mockery of natural law. A demon might have too many limbs, or not enough. Its form might shift and change as you watch it, violating every principle of conservation of mass and energy that governs the material universe. It might speak in voices that bypass your ears entirely and resonate directly in your mind, whispering truths and lies in equal measure, each one calculated to exploit your deepest fears and secret desires. Simply looking at such a creature can damage the human psyche in ways that never fully heal. Some who witness demons go mad immediately, their sanity shattering like glass struck by a hammer. They tear at their own flesh, claw out their own eyes, scream until their throats bleed and their voices give out. These are the lucky ones, in a sense, for their torment is finite and their deaths usually swift. But others begin a slower descent into corruption. They dream of what they saw. They cannot help it. For the memory of the demon has been burned into their consciousness with supernatural intensity. In their dreams, the demon speaks to them, its voice gentle and persuasive. It offers answers to questions they never thought to ask, solutions to problems they didn't know they had, power to accomplish goals they didn't know they desired, until the demon suggested them. Each dream is a crack in their spiritual armor. Each conversation with the demon a step further from salvation and closer to damnation. The corruption spreads like disease. The affected individual begins to exhibit behavioral changes. Perhaps they become more aggressive, quick to anger and violence. Perhaps they develop strange appetites, cravings for food, or experiences that grow increasingly perverse and unnatural. Perhaps they begin to hear whispers when no one is around, voices offering guidance and counsel that seem perfectly reasonable at the time, but lead invariably toward ruin. And then comes the change. Physical corruption manifesting as mutations that twist flesh and bone into new and terrible configurations. A third eye opening in the forehead, seeing things that mortal eyes were never meant to perceive, fingers elongating into claws or fusing together into appendages that serve no natural purpose, skin taking on unnatural textures and colors, scales or feathers or chitinous plates erupting from tissue that was once smooth and whole. This is what can happen from a single encounter with a demon, from one moment of witnessing what should not be. Now imagine an entire planetary population exposed to such horrors. Imagine millions of people all carrying the seeds of corruption in their minds and souls, all vulnerable to the whispers and promises of chaos. Even if only a small percentage succumb, even if 99 out of every 100 people somehow maintain their sanity and purity, that 1% represents thousands or millions of corrupted individuals who can spread the taint further. This is why the Grey Knights cannot allow knowledge of their battles to spread, because their battles are against enemies whose very existence is a mimetic hazard. To describe a demon is to invoke its power. To name it is to create a connection between the speaker and the entity named. To remember it clearly is to maintain a bridge between your mind and the warp that gives the demon influence over you even after the physical encounter has ended. When Grey Knights deploy to combat a demonic incursion, everyone present at that battle becomes compromised. The Imperial Guardsmen who held the line until the Grey Knights arrived have seen demons with their own eyes. The planetary defense forces who fought desperately against impossible odds have witnessed their comrades torn apart by claws that should not exist. The civilians who hid in shelters and bunkers have heard the screams and the unnatural sounds of battle, have smelled the sulphurous stench that accompanies demonic manifestation, have felt the air itself grow thick with malevolent presence. All of them are now vectors for potential corruption. All of them carry memories that could become doorways for chaos to enter their souls, and through them, chaos could spread to their families, their friends, their entire communities.
You know, as I've been researching and writing about the Grey Knights, I keep coming back to this uncomfortable question. Would I want to know the truth, if demons are real, if chaos was actually threatening everything we held dear? Would I want someone to tell me? Or would I rather live in ignorance, blissfully unaware of the horrors being fought in my name? I think that's what makes the Grey Knights so tragically compelling. They don't get to choose ignorance, they carry that burden for all of us. Fighting battles we'll never know happened, making sacrifices we'll never appreciate, it's that kind of hell. Being a hero that no one can ever thank. Sometimes I wonder if they envy the people they save. Anyways, back to the story.
One person's nightmares become another person's curiosity. One person's mutation becomes another person's fascination. The corruption spreads exponentially, invisibly, unstoppably, unless drastic measures are taken. This is the terrible calculus that the Inquisition and the Grey Knights must perform after every battle. How many people were present? How extensive was their exposure to demonic forces? What is the risk that they will carry corruption forward into the wider Imperium? And based on these factors, what measures are necessary to contain the threat? For Imperial Guard regiments, the answer is usually execution. Entire regiments numbering tens of thousands of soldiers are loaded onto transport ships and destroyed in transit, vaporized by directed energy weapons, or cast into stars, or otherwise eliminated without mercy or hesitation. These soldiers fought bravely, held their ground against impossible odds, gave everything they had to protect the Imperium. And their reward is death, unmarked graves in the void of space, their names struck from all records as though they never existed. For Space Marines of other chapters who might fight alongside the Grey Knights, the options are more limited. Astartes are too valuable and too difficult to replace to simply execute en masse. Instead, they are subjected to mind wiping, their memories of the battle surgically removed through a combination of psychic intervention and technological manipulation. This process is not gentle. It leaves the affected Marines hollow and diminished, with gaps in their memory that they cannot explain and a sense of loss that they cannot articulate. But it allows them to continue serving the Emperor without carrying the seeds of corruption forward. For civilian populations, the measures vary depending on the scale of exposure. Small groups might be subjected to individual interrogation and selective mind wiping, their memories edited to remove all trace of what they witnessed. Larger populations might be sterilized and placed in work camps, allowed to live out their natural lives, but prevented from producing offspring who might inherit genetic mutations or spiritual taint. In the most extreme cases, when exposure has been too widespread or too severe, entire worlds are condemned to exterminatus. Orbital bombardment, reducing planets to lifeless rocks in order to prevent the spread of chaos corruption. These are not decisions made lightly or out of cruelty. They are the cold calculations of survival, the brutal mathematics of protecting billions from the corruption that threatens to consume them. Every person executed, every mind wiped, every world condemned to exterminatus represents lives lost in the immediate term, but potentially trillions saved in the long term. For if corruption is allowed to spread unchecked, if knowledge of chaos and its demonic servants becomes common rather than exceptional, the entire Imperium could fall. The Grey Knights understand this better than anyone. They see firsthand the devastation that chaos can wreak, the speed with which corruption can spread through a population once it gains a foothold. They know that the battles they fight are against an enemy that cannot be defeated through conventional means, an enemy that grows stronger with each mind that acknowledges its existence. Their secrecy is not about protecting their own mystique or maintaining some false aura of invincibility. It is about breaking the chain of corruption before it can begin. This is why they must be forbidden from speaking of their missions, because to speak of what they do is to speak of what they fight. And to speak of what they fight is to plant seeds of corruption in the minds of those who listen. Even the most faithful servant of the Emperor, even the most pure and incorruptible soul, can be vulnerable to the insidious influence of chaos if they possess detailed knowledge of its nature and methods. The Grey Knights carry that knowledge themselves. Of course, they must, for they cannot fight an enemy they do not understand. Their libraries on Titan contain lore that would drive mortal scholars to madness, grimoires filled with true names and banishment rituals, treatises on demonology that catalogue every known demon prince and greater demon in meticulous detail. But the Grey Knights are protected by their unique gene seed, by their training, by the aegis they maintain through constant vigilance and psychic discipline. They can bear that knowledge without being corrupted by it. Others cannot. And so the Grey Knights must fight in silence, must win their battles without witnesses, must accept the necessity of mind-wiping and execution and exterminatus as the price of victory. They are the keepers of terrible knowledge, the bearers of burdens too heavy for ordinary humans to carry. And part of that burden is the knowledge that the people they save must never know they were in danger, for that knowledge itself would doom them as surely as any demon's claw. The Chamber Militant's sacred bond. Within the vast and Byzantine structure of the Imperial Inquisition, there exist 3 major orders, each dedicated to combating a specific threat to humanity's continued existence. The Ordo Xenos hunts alien species that threaten mankind's dominion over the stars. The Ordo Hereticus roots out corruption and heresy from within the Imperium's own ranks, purging those who have turned against the Emperor's light. But it is the Ordo Malleus, the demon hunters, who face the most insidious and terrible threat of all. They are the ones who battle against chaos in its purest form, who confront demons and demon princes, who investigate warp incursions and psychic phenomena that could tear reality apart at the seams. And the Grey Knights are their chamber militant, their military arm, the warriors they call upon when investigation must give way to righteous violence. This relationship between the Ordo Malleus and the Grey Knights is unique among the Chamber's militant. The Death Watch serves the Ordo Xenos, true, and the Sisters of Battle stand as the militant arm of the Ordo Hereticus. But neither of those relationships carries the same weight of absolute secrecy and mutual dependence that binds the Grey Knights to the demon hunters. For the Ordo Malleus fights an enemy that cannot be fought through conventional means, and the Grey Knights provide the only reliable method of combating that enemy. This symbiotic relationship was established at the very founding of both organizations. The 4 mortal lords that Malcador selected alongside the 8 original Grey Knights went on to establish the Inquisition itself, laying the groundwork for an organization that would span the galaxy and wield power second only to the Emperor himself. They designed the Inquisition to be fractured, with each Inquisitor operating independently under broad mandates but without strict hierarchical control. This lack of centralization made the organization resistant to corruption, for there was no single point of failure, no one person whose fall could compromise the entire institution. But the Ordo Malleus needed something that individual Inquisitors, no matter how skilled or determined, could not provide. They needed military force capable of standing against demonic incursions, warriors who could fight entities that violated every natural law and defied conventional tactics. Space Marines from other chapters could be requisitioned for such purposes, and indeed often were. But Space Marines not specifically trained and equipped for demon hunting faced terrible risks. They could be corrupted by what they fought, turned into weapons against the very Imperium they sought to defend. The Grey Knights represented the solution to this problem. They were incorruptible by nature and training. They were psychically gifted, able to match demon princes in battles of will, as well as martial prowess. They were equipped with specialized weapons and armor designed specifically for fighting entities of the warp. Most importantly, they existed in absolute secrecy, known only to the Inquisition and the highest echelons of imperial leadership. This meant that the Ordo Malleus could deploy them without the wider Imperium learning of the demonic threats being combated. The arrangement works thus. Inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus investigate reports of psychic phenomena, disappearances, and other anomalies that might indicate demonic activity. They gather evidence, perform rituals of divination, consult with astropaths and navigators who have felt disturbances in the warp. When they determine that a demonic incursion has occurred or is imminent, they have several options. Small-scale threats might be handled by the Inquisitor's personal retinue, experienced warriors and specialists who have been mind-wiped or otherwise secured against corruption. Larger threats might require the deployment of conventional Imperial forces, guard regiments, planetary defense forces, perhaps even Astartes from other chapters if the threat is sufficiently severe. But when the threat involves demon princes, when greater demons walk in real space, when the veil between the warp and reality has grown so thin that conventional forces would be slaughtered or corrupted in moments, the Inquisitors call upon the Grey Knights. This summons is not made lightly. The Grey Knights are a chapter of only 1,000 battle brothers, spread across an entire galaxy. They cannot be everywhere at once, cannot respond to every demonic manifestation that occurs across the Imperium's million worlds. The prognosticars, those Grey Knights who specialize in prescient visions and warp sight, work constantly to identify the most critical threats, the incursions that pose the greatest danger to the most people. But even with their guidance, hard choices must be made. Some worlds must be left to their fate, some populations abandoned to corruption or death, because the Grey Knights' limited numbers cannot protect everyone. When the Grey Knights do deploy, they operate under the direct authority of the Inquisitor who summoned them, but they maintain tactical autonomy. The Inquisitor provides intelligence, coordinates with local Imperial forces, and makes political decisions about what happens after the battle. The Grey Knights focus solely on the combat itself, bringing their specialized knowledge and capabilities to bear against the demonic threat. This division of labor serves both organizations well. The Inquisitors do not need to be expert demon slayers themselves. They need only be able to identify threats and summon appropriate responses. The Grey Knights do not need to manage the complex political and administrative aftermath of their interventions. They need only to kill demons and ensure that those who witness them doing so are properly processed. But this relationship also reinforces the necessity of absolute secrecy. Every time the Grey Knights deploy, they do so at the behest of an Inquisitor, which means every deployment is by definition an inquisitorial matter. And inquisitorial matters are secrets by default, protected by layers of classification and compartmentalization that make it nearly impossible for unauthorized individuals to learn what occurred. The Inquisition's authority to mind-wipe and execute extends to this purpose specifically, protecting the secrets of their operations, including the existence and activities of their chamber militant. There have been occasions when this secrecy has created friction. Other Imperial organizations, ignorant of the Grey Knights' existence, have found themselves caught in the aftermath of Grey Knight operations. Planetary governors discover that their defense forces have been destroyed or mind-wiped without explanation. Navy admirals find that entire fleets have been requisitioned and never returned. Administratum officials investigate mysterious expenditures and troop deployments that appear in no official records. These investigations are quietly suppressed by the Inquisition. The investigators themselves often subjected to mind-wiping or other measures to ensure they do not pursue the matter further. This creates a cycle of secrecy, reinforcing itself. The Grey Knights must remain secret to protect the Imperium from knowledge of chaos, which means the Inquisition must protect the secret of the Grey Knights, which requires further secrecy and further interventions that themselves must be kept secret. The Ordo Malleus and the Grey Knights share more than just a working relationship. They share a burden of knowledge, an understanding of the true nature of the threats facing humanity that few others possess. Inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus spend their lives studying chaos, learning its methods and identifying its servants. They maintain the Librarium Daemonica on Titan, that vast repository of forbidden lore where tens of thousands of tomes, detail the nature of demons and the rituals required to banish them. They risk their own sanity and souls in this study, knowing that to fight chaos, one must understand it, even though that understanding itself is dangerous. The Grey Knights are their shield against the consequences of that understanding. When inquisitors must confront demons directly, when their investigations lead them into the heart of corruption itself, the Grey Knights stand ready to protect them. When inquisitors fall to the very corruption they sought to fight, as occasionally happens despite all precautions, the Grey Knights are the ones who hunt them down and end their threat before it can spread. This creates a bond of absolute trust between the two organizations. The Ordo Malleus knows that the Grey Knights will never betray them, never fall to corruption, never turn against the Imperium they were created to protect. The Grey Knights know that the Ordo Malleus will provide them with the intelligence and support they need to identify and combat demonic threats, and will handle the difficult aftermath of ensuring that knowledge of those threats does not spread beyond those who need to know. Together, they wage a war that the rest of the Imperium cannot know is being fought. They battle against enemies whose very existence is denied by official Imperial doctrine. They make sacrifices that will never be acknowledged and win victories that will never be celebrated. And they do so in the shadows, hidden from the very people they protect, bound together by shared purpose and mutual necessity. The relationship between the Grey Knights and the Ordo Malleus is the relationship between a sword and the hand that wields it. Neither is complete without the other. Neither can fully accomplish its purpose alone, and the secrecy that surrounds them both is not a choice, but a fundamental requirement of their existence. For the war they fight is one that must be won in silence, lest the enemy gain strength from the very knowledge of the battle. Protocols of erasure. The aftermath of a Grey Knight deployment follows a pattern as rigid and inescapable as the tides of Terra's ancient oceans. Victory has been achieved. The demonic incursion has been banished, the warp rift sealed, the corrupted cultists put to the sword. Silver armor stands stained with ichor that should not exist in real space, and the psychic presence of the Grey Knights has driven the last lingering taint of chaos back into the Imperium. The planet is safe. Humanity is protected. The Emperor's light has prevailed over the darkness. And now the real work begins. The protocols are not written down in any official capacity. They exist instead as understood procedures, as institutional knowledge passed from one generation of inquisitors to the next, as unspoken agreements between the Ordo Malleus and the Grey Knights that have been refined over 10,000 years of practice. But though unwritten, they are absolute. They are followed without exception, without mercy, without hesitation. For the battle against demons is only half won when the demons are banished. The other half lies in ensuring that knowledge of the battle does not become the seed of future corruption. The first step is assessment. Inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus, often working alongside Grey Knight librarians who can sense lingering taint in human souls, evaluate every individual who was present during the demonic incursion. This is not a cursory examination. Each person is interviewed extensively, their memories probed by psychic interrogation, their bodies scanned for signs of mutation or possession. The Inquisitors are looking for evidence of corruption, yes, but they are also cataloguing the extent of each individual's exposure to chaos. How long were they in the presence of manifested demons? Did they make direct eye contact with entities from the warp? Did they hear the whispered promises and blasphemous utterances that demons use to corrupt the faithful? Were they wounded by demonic weapons, their blood mixing with unholy ichor? All of these factors contribute to a calculation of corruption risk, a percentage chance that the individual will become a vector for chaos taint in the future. The threshold for acceptable risk is mercilessly low. An ordinary civilian with even a 5% chance of future corruption is marked for termination. An Imperial Guardsman with a 10% risk is scheduled for execution. The math is brutal but necessary. Better to kill 1,000 potentially corrupted individuals than to allow even one demon to use them as a doorway back into real space. For those deemed to have lower corruption risk but who still possess dangerous knowledge, mind wiping is the preferred option. This procedure, formerly called mind cleansing in inquisitorial documents, but colloquially known as mind scrubbing or the death of self, is an ordeal that combines psychic intervention, electrochemical manipulation, and psychoviral conditioning to selectively erase memories from a person's consciousness. The process begins with psychic probing. An inquisitorial telepath, usually accompanied by a sanctioned psyker who has been specifically trained and conditioned for this work, delves into the subject's mind with their consciousness. They identify the memories that must be removed, the sight of demons, the sound of their voices, the feel of their presence. These memories are isolated, marked, prepared for excision. Then comes the chemical phase. Specialized drugs are administered. Compounds that make the subject's neural pathways more malleable, more susceptible to rewriting. The blood-brain barrier is temporarily compromised, allowing the introduction of psychoviral agents that attach to specific neurons associated with the targeted memories. These viruses literally eat away at the neural connections that store the forbidden knowledge, creating gaps in the subject's recollection that will never fully heal. The psychic phase follows. While the drugs and viruses do their work on the physical structure of the brain, the telepaths work on the psychic impression of the memories. They sever the connections between the subject's soul and the warp energies associated with their trauma. They remove the spiritual taint that witnessing chaos has left upon the subject's essence. This is the most dangerous part of the procedure, for it requires the telepaths themselves to touch that taint, to take it into their own consciousness before casting it away. Many telepaths who specialize in mind cleansing eventually succumb to the accumulated corruption of thousands of such procedures, their own sanity eroding under the weight of horrors they have vicariously experienced. Finally, the reconstruction phase. The gaps left by erased memories must be filled, lest the subject's consciousness notice the absence and begin asking dangerous questions. False memories are implanted, constructed from the subject's own experiences and personality to create a seamless narrative that explains the missing time. Perhaps they were unconscious during the battle, knocked out by an explosion, or rendered insensate by shock. Perhaps they were evacuated before the fighting reached them, saved by the quick action of Imperial forces. The specific details vary depending on the individual case, but the goal is always the same: to create a coherent personal history that contains no reference to demons, chaos, or grey knights. The results of mind cleansing are mixed. In the best cases, the subject emerges with no memory of their trauma and no apparent ill effects. They return to their duties or their civilian lives, their service to the Emperor having erased the dangerous knowledge they briefly possessed. But many are not so fortunate. The procedure is not gentle, and it leaves scars that may not be immediately visible, but are nonetheless real. Some emerge hollow, emotionally flattened, as if the removal of traumatic memories has also removed their capacity for feeling. They go through the motions of life with mechanical precision, but no joy, no passion, no sense of connection to the world around them. Others develop inexplicable gaps in their abilities or knowledge, skills they once possessed, now mysteriously absent because they were too closely associated with the erased memories. A guardsman might forget how to field strip his laser gun. A tech priest might lose the ability to perform certain rituals, the knowledge deleted along with the context in which he learned them. Worst of all are those in whom the original memories begin to reassert themselves. The human mind is resilient, and sometimes the neural pathways that were destroyed begin to rebuild themselves. Fragments of forbidden knowledge bubbling up from deep in the subconscious, like corpses rising from a grave. These individuals experience flashbacks, nightmares, moments of déjà vu that leave them dizzy and confused. They might speak of things they should not know, remember events that according to their false memories never happened. When this occurs, they are brought back for additional mind cleansing, subjected to the procedure again and again, until either the memories stay buried or the subject's mind breaks entirely. For Space Marines, the protocols are slightly different. Astartes are too valuable to execute wholesale, their training and experience too difficult to replace. When other chapters Marines fight alongside Grey Knights and witness demonic incursions, they are subjected to mind-wiping, but with more care taken to preserve their combat effectiveness. Sometimes they are bound by oaths of secrecy instead, sworn to their Primarch's memory never to speak of what they witnessed. These oaths are taken with the gravest solemnity, and breaking them is considered a betrayal worthy of death. But even these measures cannot always prevent knowledge from spreading. Space Marines talk to one another, sharing stories of battles and campaigns. A mind-wiped Marine might not remember the specifics of fighting demons, but his brothers notice the gap in his service record, the missing months or years that no one can explain. They ask questions, make inquiries, sometimes even demand answers from their chapter leadership. This curiosity itself becomes dangerous, a crack in the wall of secrecy that the Inquisition must work constantly to seal. For entire populations, the protocols scale up to match the scope of exposure. When a planetary population has been extensively exposed to chaos, when too many civilians have witnessed too much for mind-wiping to be practical, the Inquisition resorts to what it euphemistically calls processing. The civilians are rounded up by inquisitorial stormtroopers, separated from their families, and transported to work camps on distant worlds. There they are sterilized to prevent potentially corrupted genetics from spreading to the next generation. And they labor until they die, their lives extended as much as possible to extract every ounce of useful work, but their ability to reproduce or contaminate future generations permanently ended. The worlds they came from are then repopulated with colonists from other regions of the Imperium, people who have no knowledge of the demonic incursion that occurred. Historical records are altered or destroyed, monuments and memorials removed or recontextualized, entire chapters of planetary history rewritten to exclude any reference to chaos. Within a generation or two, it is as if the incursion never happened, the truth buried so deeply that even archaeological evidence would be insufficient to reconstruct it. In the most extreme cases, when corruption has spread too far or too deep, when the risk of future demonic manifestation is deemed unacceptably high, the Inquisition authorizes exterminatus. Orbital bombardment reduces the entire planet to a lifeless rock, its surface scoured by cyclonic torpedoes or virus bombs or lance strikes from Navy battleships. Billions die in moments, their deaths justified by the trillions who would die if corruption were allowed to spread unchecked. The Grey Knights themselves are both the instruments and the beneficiaries of these protocols. They fight knowing that everyone who sees them fight will either die or be mind-wiped. They accept this as necessary, as the price of their effectiveness. A Grey Knight may save a guard regiment from annihilation by demons, only to watch from orbit as those same guardsmen are executed in their transport ships. He may purge a hive city of corruption, preserving millions of lives, only to be present when those millions are sterilized and shipped off to labor camps because they know too much. This creates a profound loneliness at the heart of the Grey Knight experience. They are heroes whose heroism must never be acknowledged. They are saviors who saved must forget they were ever in danger. They fight for humanity, but cannot be part of humanity, forever separated by the wall of secrecy that their very existence requires. Some have argued that these protocols go too far, that the cure is worse than the disease, that the Imperium loses more through fear and paranoia than it would through allowing some knowledge of chaos to exist. But those who make such arguments do not understand the nature of the threat. Chaos is not like a physical enemy that can be fought and defeated through conventional means. It is a mimetic hazard, a virus of the soul that spreads through knowledge and awareness. Every person who learns of it becomes a potential host for corruption, a doorway through which demons can enter real space. The protocols of erasure are not cruelty for cruelty's sake. They are mathematics made flesh, cold calculations of acceptable losses and necessary sacrifices. They are the price humanity pays for survival in a galaxy where knowledge itself can be weaponized, where even victory against chaos can sow the seeds of future defeat if not carefully managed. And they are the burden that the Grey Knights carry, knowing that their greatest victories will be measured not in parades or monuments, but in the continued ignorance of those they protect. Armageddon, when victory demands the highest price. In the year 444 of the 41st Millennium, a space hulk, designated as the Devourer of Stars, translated from the warp into real space above Armageddon, a strategically vital hive world in the segmentum solar. From the corrupted bowels of that massive conglomeration of fused starships, a horror long thought banished emerged to wage war upon the Imperium. Angron, once Primarch of the World Eaters Legion, now a demon prince in the service of Khorne, had returned to strike at the heart of Imperial power. The invasion was devastating in its speed and savagery. Nearly half of Armageddon's planetary defense force turned traitor almost immediately, corrupted by the presence of the demon Primarch and the bloodlust that radiated from him like heat from a furnace. Angron led his World Eaters and their demonic allies in a rampage across Armageddon Prime, slaughtering millions in the first weeks of the invasion. Cities fell, their populations either butchered wholesale or twisted into slavering cultists who took up weapons against their former comrades. Logan Grimnar, Great Wolf of the Space Wolves chapter, responded to Armageddon's desperate pleas for aid with the full might of his chapter. 300 Space Wolves deployed to the beleaguered world, their grey armor and fierce determination a bulwark against the tide of chaos. They organized the surviving Imperial forces, coordinated defensive positions along the rivers Styx and Charon, and bought precious time for reinforcements to arrive. But Grimnar knew, even as he fought, that conventional forces would not be enough. Angron was no ordinary enemy. As a demon prince, he was functionally immortal, able to regenerate from wounds that would kill any mortal being, empowered by the very bloodshed that his presence inspired. To truly defeat him required specialized knowledge and capabilities that even the Space Wolves, for all their skill and ferocity, did not possess. Grimnar called for the Grey Knights. The response was immediate. The prognosticars on Titan had foreseen the demon Primarch's return, had watched the threads of fate converge on Armageddon with terrible inevitability. A full brotherhood of 100 Grey Knights, the entire Third Brotherhood under the command of Brother Captain Taramar Aurelian, deployed via warp jump directly to Armageddon. They arrived at the crucial moment, when Imperial lines were buckling under Angron's western assault, when defeat seemed inevitable and the cost of victory unimaginable. The Grey Knights teleported directly into the heart of the demonic horde. 109 Terminators in silver armor, each one a psychic warrior of tremendous power, materialized in a circle around Angron and his bodyguard of 12 bloodthirsters. The fighting that followed was apocalyptic in its intensity. Angron, wielding his black blade of terrible power, cut down 5 Grey Knights with a single stroke. Their blessed armor no defense against a weapon forged in the hell forges of the warp and empowered by the blood of countless sacrifices. The bloodthirsters were equally devastating, each one a match for multiple Grey Knights. These were not lesser demons, but the greatest servants of Khorne, demon princes in their own right, beings whose existence was measured in millennia and whose power could shatter armies. They waded through the Grey Knights like reapers through wheat, their axes and swords drinking deep of transhuman blood. But the Grey Knights had not come to Armageddon to die. They had come to win, no matter the cost. A young recruit named Hyperion, later to become famous within the chapter, though his name would never be spoken beyond its walls, used his psychic might to shatter Angron's black blade, destroying the weapon that had slain so many of his brothers. Without it, the demon Primarch was vulnerable to their nemesis force weapons. blessed blades that could harm entities of pure warp stuff. Brother Captain Aurelius led the final assault. He drove his nemesis weapon deep into Angron's heart, speaking the true name of the demon Primarch, invoking the rituals of banishment that would send the entity screaming back into the warp. It cost Aurelius his life. Angron's death throes tore the brother captain apart, his sacrifice buying the precious seconds needed for the banishment to take effect. When the demon Primarch vanished, his bloodthirsters following him back into the Imperium, the remaining Chaos forces broke and fled. The Space Wolves launched a devastating counter-offensive, pursuing the enemy across the ash wastes, slaughtering cultists and traitor guardsmen without mercy. Victory was complete. Armageddon was saved. But the cost had been terrible. Of the 109 Grey Knights who teleported into battle against Angron, only 13 survived. Nearly the entire Brotherhood had been annihilated, irreplaceable warriors whose training and experience represented decades or centuries of service lost in a single afternoon. The Space Wolves had suffered heavily as well, though their casualties were proportionally lighter. The Imperial Guard and PDF forces who had held the line lost millions of soldiers. And then came the aftermath that would poison relationships between the Inquisition and the Space Wolves for centuries to come. Logan Grimner, veteran of countless campaigns and leader of a first founding chapter, was not naive about the Inquisition's methods. He knew that the Ordo Malleus would want to suppress knowledge of the demonic invasion. He understood the reasoning, had even agreed in principle that some level of information control would be necessary. But he had also fought alongside the men and women of Armageddon, had seen their courage in the face of impossible odds, had led them to victory through determination and sacrifice. They were heroes, and he believed they deserved better than the standard inquisitorial processing. Lord Inquisitor Gesme Kisnaros, the ranking inquisitor present, had different priorities. From his perspective, the entire population of Armageddon had been exposed to chaos corruption. They had seen demons with their own eyes, heard their blasphemous utterances, witnessed the depravity and violence that always accompanied demonic incursions. Every single person who had been present during the invasion was a potential vector for future corruption, a walking time bomb that could explode into mutation or possession at any moment. The order came down from the Inquisition. Total purge. The surviving civilians would be rounded up, sterilized, and shipped to work camps where they would labor until they died. The Guard regiments and PDF forces who had fought so bravely would be loaded onto transport ships, ostensibly for reassignment, and then destroyed in transit. Armageddon would be repopulated with colonists from other worlds, people who had no knowledge of the invasion. The truth would be buried so deeply that future generations would believe this was only the second war fought for Armageddon, not the third. Grimnar was appalled. He had been given assurances by the Inquisition and the Grey Knights that most of the survivors would not be harmed, that the brave defenders who had held the line against impossible odds would be allowed to continue serving the Emperor. He had specifically structured his defense and deployment of the Grey Knights to minimize civilian exposure to demonic forces, believing that this would reduce the need for extensive purges. To learn that the Inquisition intended to proceed with wholesale execution and sterilization despite his efforts felt like a betrayal of the worst kind. He kept his fleet in orbit over Armageddon, suspicious and watchful. When the purges began on the planet's surface, when inquisitorial stormtroopers started herding civilians toward processing centers, Grimnar made his decision. He would save as many as he could, regardless of what the Inquisition wanted. Space Wolves vessels moved to intercept the first transport ships leaving Armageddon, the troop carriers loaded with Guard regiments being sent to their deaths. Grimnar ordered his ships to position themselves between the transports and the Inquisition vessels that were waiting to destroy them. He dared the Inquisition to fire on Space Marines, to kill the defenders of a chapter that had served the Emperor since before the Horus Heresy. For a time, it worked. Several transports escaped under Space Wolves' protection, translating into the warp and fleeing to distant worlds where they might find sanctuary. But Kisnaros was not deterred. He simply expanded the scope of his purge, declaring that any world or installation that came into contact with Armageddon survivors must also be cleansed to prevent the spread of corruption. Entire planets were subjected to exterminatus. Adeptus Mechanicus outposts were destroyed. Astropathic relay stations were obliterated, their inhabitants killed simply for having transmitted messages from Armageddon refugees. The body count spiraled into the billions. Millions had died fighting Angron and his demonic horde. Now, billions more died in the aftermath, victims of the Inquisition's determination to prevent even the possibility of chaos corruption spreading. And through it all, the Space Wolves and the Inquisition moved closer and closer to open war. The conflict that followed would be known as the Months of Shame, a period of cold war between the Space Wolves and the forces of the Inquisition that nearly tore both organizations apart. Grey Knight's vessels destroyed Space Wolves' ships. Space Wolves' ground forces massacred inquisitorial stormtroopers. Entire brotherhoods of Grey Knights were deployed, not to fight demons, but to hunt down and eliminate the Armageddon survivors that the Space Wolves were trying to protect. It ended only when Lord Inquisitor Kisnaros gathered an entire battle fleet, including the entirety of the Red Hunters chapter, and prepared to assault Fenris itself, the Space Wolves' homeworld. He brought with him Hyperion, the young Grey Knight who had shattered Angron's blade and earned the respect of the Space Wolves for his role in their victory. He brought Inquisitor Jarlsdottir, who had family ties to Fenris and might be able to negotiate with the Space Wolves. The message was clear: submit to inquisitorial authority and accept the purges, or watch your world burn. The Space Wolves called Kisnaros' bluff. They gathered their full strength, prepared the Fang for siege, and dared the Inquisition to attack a first founding chapter on their home world. Logan Grimner himself boarded Kisnaros' flagship under flag of parley, demanded to know who had ordered the destruction of Space Wolves' vessels. And when a Grey Knight Grand Master admitted responsibility, Grimnar killed him with his legendary axe Morkai before teleporting back to his own ship. Only the intervention of Bjorn the Fell-Handed, the ancient dreadnought who had fought alongside Leman Russ himself during the Great Crusade, prevented full-scale war. Bjorn convinced both sides to stand down, arguing that the Emperor's servants fighting among themselves only served the purposes of chaos. A tense peace was established. The purges on Armageddon continued, but the Space Wolves were allowed to keep the survivors they had already saved. The Inquisition backed off from Fenris. The cost had been paid in full. The First War for Armageddon and the months of shame that followed demonstrated the terrible price of the Grey Knight's secrecy protocols. Billions of people died, not from demonic corruption, but from the measures taken to prevent such corruption. Billions more were sterilized and sent to work camps, their lives extended, but their ability to have families or futures permanently ended. An entire planetary population was displaced and replaced, their history erased as thoroughly as if it had never happened. And yet, from the Inquisition's perspective, it was all necessary, because even one person carrying chaos corruption forward could doom entire sectors. Even one demonic possession could lead to another incursion, another invasion, another billion deaths. The mathematics were brutal but undeniable. Better to kill billions now than to risk trillions later. This is the reality of fighting chaos. This is the price that must be paid to keep humanity safe from threats they cannot be allowed to know exist. The Grey Knights won a great victory on Armageddon, banishing a demon Primarch and saving a strategically vital world. But that victory came with a cost that would echo through the centuries, a reminder that sometimes the aftermath of battle is more terrible than the battle itself. The tactical invisibility, beyond the prevention of corruption, beyond the protection of dangerous knowledge from minds unprepared to bear it, there exists another reason for the Grey Knight's absolute secrecy. It is a reason rooted not in spiritual concerns, but in cold military pragmatism. The Grey Knights fight an enemy that can see the future, read thoughts, and manipulate probability itself. Against such foes, any tactical advantage must be preserved with zealous determination. And the greatest tactical advantage the Grey Knights possess is one that most military theorists might overlook. Their enemies do not know they exist. Consider the nature of the forces arrayed against the Imperium. Demon princes who have existed for thousands of years, accumulating knowledge and experience across countless battles. Greater demons who remember the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy as recent events, who have seen civilizations rise and fall, who have learned from every encounter with mortal warriors. Chaos sorcerers who can peer through time itself, witnessing possible futures and preparing countermeasures against threats that have not yet manifested. These are not enemies that can be surprised through conventional means. A normal imperial force, no matter how well trained or well equipped, announces its presence long before it arrives. The warp ripples with the psychic echoes of troop movements. Astropathic communications can be intercepted or predicted. Even the simple logistics of assembling a battle force creates patterns that experienced enemies can detect and interpret. But the Grey Knights operate differently. Their fortress monastery on Titan is shielded by wards that Malkador himself crafted, psychic barriers that hide the moon from detection, even by the most powerful scrying. Their ships travel through the warp, using routes known only to them, navigated by Grey Knight librarians whose understanding of the Imperium surpasses even that of the most experienced navigators. When they deploy to a war zone, they do so with minimal warning, often teleporting directly into battle rather than following conventional deployment patterns. This tactical invisibility is magnified by the fact that their enemies, for the most part, do not know they exist. A demon prince preparing for an incursion into real space accounts for Imperial Guard regiments, for Space Marine intervention, perhaps even for inquisitorial forces. He prepares rituals to corrupt the minds of guardsmen, develops strategies to overwhelm Space Marine defenses, creates contingencies for psychic assault from sanctioned psychers and librarians. But he does not prepare for the Grey Knights, because he does not know they are coming. He does not know that there exists a chapter of Space Marines specifically designed to fight demons, equipped with weapons that can permanently banish entities of the warp, trained in rituals that can unmake even the most powerful demon princes. His first warning that something is amiss comes when silver-armored warriors appear in his midst, wielding force weapons that burn with psychic fire, speaking true names that strip away the demon's power, even as blessed bolts tear through unholy flesh. This surprise is worth more than any amount of firepower or armor. It disrupts carefully laid plans, forces improvisation where the enemy expected to execute prepared tactics, creates chaos in the ranks of those who thought they controlled all variables. Demons who might have developed specific countermeasures against psychic warriors find themselves facing psychic warriors unlike any they have encountered before. Cultists who were prepared to die in the name of their dark gods instead flee in terror before enemies whose very presence causes them physical and spiritual pain. The Grey Knight's specialized equipment and tactics are protected by this same secrecy. Their nemesis force weapons, psychically attuned blades that can harm demons in ways that normal weapons cannot, are unknown outside the chapter. Their mastery of true names and banishment rituals is a jealously guarded secret, for if Chaos forces knew the full extent of this knowledge, they could develop methods to counter it. Even the specific psychic techniques that Grey Knights use to channel the Aegis, that protective ward that makes their souls inviolable to Chaos, would become vulnerable if their enemies understood exactly how it functioned. There is a particular ritual that Grey Knights perform before battle, a rite of preparation that involves carving hexagrammic wards into their armor, anointing their weapons with blessed oils, and speaking prayers in languages that predate the Imperium itself. This ritual is not merely symbolic. It has tangible effects on the warp, creating resonances and patterns that strengthen the Grey Knight's psychic presence and make them more effective demon slayers. But if this ritual became widely known, if its specific components and procedures were documented and disseminated, chaos sorcerers could develop counter-rituals. They could create interference patterns that disrupted the hexagrammic wards, could craft blasphemous prayers that nullified the blessed oils, could invoke dark powers to corrupt the ancient languages the Grey Knights speak. The effectiveness of the ritual depends in part on its secrecy, on the enemy's ignorance of what protections are being invoked and how they might be overcome. The same principle applies to the Grey Knights' tactical doctrines. They have developed specialized strategies for fighting different types of demons, accumulated over 10,000 years of continuous warfare against the forces of chaos. They know, for instance, that cornate demons are vulnerable to certain psychic attacks, but resistant to others, that demons of Zench can be bound through specific ritual structures, that Nurgle's servants can be banished through cleansing fires if properly blessed. This knowledge is power, but only as long as it remains exclusive to the Grey Knights. If Chaos forces knew the specific tactics that Grey Knights use against different demon types, those tactics would become less effective. Demon princes would develop countermeasures, adapt their summoning rituals to create demons resistant to Grey Knight methods, prepare their mortal servants with knowledge of how to disrupt Grey Knight battle plans. There is also the psychological aspect of tactical invisibility to consider. Human enemies of the Imperium, cultists and traitors who serve chaos knowingly, operate under certain assumptions about what forces they might face. They know the Imperial Guard will come in vast numbers, overwhelming through sheer weight of fire and bodies. They know Space Marines will be elite, but limited in number, able to be defeated through attrition or environmental advantages. They know the Inquisition will investigate and interrogate, pursuing heresy through detective work before resorting to force. But they do not know about the Grey Knights, and this ignorance creates vulnerabilities. A cult leader planning a demonic summoning might take elaborate precautions against conventional Imperial forces, might establish defensive positions and prepare escape routes, might even make contingency plans for Space Marine intervention. But he does not prepare for an enemy who can teleport directly into the heart of his ritual chamber, who can speak words of banishment that tear his summoned demon apart before it fully manifests, who can kill him and all his followers before they even realize they are under attack. This element of surprise is preserved through the mind-wiping and execution protocols that follow every Grey Knight deployment. If even one survivor of such an attack escaped and spread word of what occurred, if they described the silver-armored warriors who appeared without warning and slaughtered an entire cult in minutes, that information would eventually reach other Chaos cultists. They would begin to prepare for such threats, develop contingencies, create warning systems that could detect Grey Knight deployment. Over time, this accumulated knowledge would erode the tactical advantage that secrecy provides. Cultists would start summoning demons in locations that are harder for the Grey Knights to teleport into, or surrounding their rituals with psychic barriers designed to disrupt teleportation. They would develop specific wards against the types of psychic attacks that Grey Knights employ. They would train their followers to resist the spiritual pain that the Grey Knight's presence inflicts on those tainted by chaos. But this does not happen, because there are no survivors. Because anyone who witnesses a Grey Knight deployment and lives through it is either mind-wiped to remove those memories, or executed to ensure they cannot spread them. The Grey Knights remain ghosts, shadows, enemies that chaos forces do not know to fear until it is far too late. This tactical invisibility extends even to other Imperial forces. While the highest levels of Imperial leadership know that the Grey Knights exist, the vast majority of Imperial commanders and soldiers do not. This means that the Grey Knights can be deployed to support conventional Imperial operations without those operations being compromised by information leaks or enemy intelligence gathering. An Astra Militarum general planning a campaign against a world suspected of harboring chaos cultists will make his plans based on the forces he knows he has available. He will not account for possible Grey Knight intervention, will not structure his strategy around the assumption that specialized demon hunters might appear. This is actually an advantage, because it prevents the enemy from detecting unusual patterns in Imperial deployments that might indicate something beyond a standard military operation is planned. When the Grey Knights do deploy in support of such operations, they do so independently of conventional command structures. They coordinate with the Inquisitors who summoned them, but they do not report to the general commanding Imperial forces. They strike at demon-related targets that the general may not even know exist, eliminating threats that conventional forces would struggle to comprehend, let alone combat. And when they withdraw, they leave no evidence of their presence beyond the corpses of cultists and the lingering psychic residue of banished demons. This allows the Imperial forces to claim a clean victory, to report that they defeated a rebellion or eliminated a Xenos threat, never knowing that they were facing something far more dangerous and that they were saved by warriors whose existence they are not permitted to know about. The tactical advantage of invisibility, then, is multifaceted. It provides surprise in battle, preserves specialized knowledge and techniques from enemy adaptation, creates psychological uncertainty in those who might oppose the Imperium, and allows for seamless integration with conventional Imperial operations without compromising operational security. It is an advantage that can only be maintained through absolute secrecy, through the uncompromising enforcement of protocols that ensure no one who knows of the Grey Knights is allowed to spread that knowledge. And it is an advantage that has proven itself worth the terrible cost, battle after battle, campaign after campaign, across 10,000 years of continuous warfare against the forces of chaos. Heroes who die unknown. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with being a Grey Knight, an isolation that cuts deeper than physical distance or separation from loved ones. It is the loneliness of the unknown hero, the warrior who gives everything in service to humanity, but who can never be acknowledged for his sacrifice. It is the burden of fighting battles that history will never record, of dying deaths that will never be mourned beyond the basalt walls of Titan's fortress monastery. Every Grey Knight knows, from the moment of his induction into the chapter, that his name will never be spoken in the Imperium at large. There will be no statues erected in his honor, no worlds named after him, no songs sung by grateful populations whose lives he saved. The battles he fights will not appear in official Imperial histories. The demons he banishes will not be counted among his kills in any public record. His very existence is a secret that will be kept even after his death. His body recovered and laid to rest in crypts that no one outside the chapter and the Inquisition will ever visit. Compare this to the experience of Space Marines in other chapters. When an ultramarine falls in battle, his deeds are recorded in the chapter's great archives. His name is carved into monuments, spoken at ceremonies, remembered by his battle brothers for generations to come. The worlds he helped save know of his sacrifice, and their citizens offer prayers in his memory. His legacy lives on, not just in the gene seed harvested from his body, but in the cultural memory of the Imperium he served. When a Grey Knight falls in battle, his body is retrieved, if at all possible, brought back to Titan through the same secretive routes that the chapter uses for all its operations. In the deep halls beneath the fortress monastery, in crypts carved from ancient basalt, his remains are laid to rest with full honors. His name is added to the great walls where every Grey Knight who has ever fallen is commemorated. His brothers gather to mourn him, to speak his name one final time, to remember his deeds and his sacrifice. But beyond those walls, his death means nothing to the wider Imperium. The world he died defending does not know he was there. The people he saved from demonic incursion have no idea they were ever in danger, let alone that he gave his life to protect them. Even other Imperial forces who might have fought alongside him will have those memories erased, mind wiped away along with all knowledge of the demons they faced. This creates a profound sense of purposelessness that Grey Knights must learn to overcome. Human beings are social creatures. driven by a need for recognition and validation from their peers. We want our efforts to be acknowledged, our sacrifices to be appreciated, our achievements to be celebrated. This is not mere vanity. It is a fundamental aspect of how humans derive meaning from their actions. We are motivated by the knowledge that what we do matters to others, that our lives have impact beyond ourselves. But Grey Knights must find meaning in service that will never be acknowledged. They must derive purpose from battles that will never be recorded. They must accept that their greatest victories will be measured not in glory or honor, but in the continued ignorance of those they protect. This requires a level of selflessness that goes beyond normal military discipline or faith in the Emperor. It requires the ability to be content with serving a purpose that only a tiny handful of people will ever know existed. The training that Grey Knights undergo addresses this psychological challenge directly. From their earliest days as recruits, they are taught to find satisfaction in duty itself rather than in external recognition. They learn to measure success not by public acknowledgement, but by internal standards. Did I banish the demon? Did I protect the innocent? Did I serve the Emperor faithfully? These become the metrics by which they judge themselves, replacing the normal human desire for social validation with something more austere and self-contained. But no amount of training can fully eliminate the isolation that comes with being unknown. Grey Knights are still human beneath their augmentations, still possessed of emotions and desires that cannot be entirely suppressed. They form bonds with their battle brothers, yes, develop deep friendships forged in shared combat against terrible foes, but they cannot share their experiences with anyone outside the chapter. They cannot write letters home to families they will never see again. They cannot even speak freely to other Imperial forces they might encounter, for every interaction is filtered through the knowledge that those they speak to will either die or have their memories erased before the day is done. There is a particular ritual that some Grey Knights perform in private, a personal remembrance of the people they have saved over the course of their service. They keep mental tallies of specific individuals whose lives they preserved, committing faces and names to memory, even though they will never speak those names aloud. A child pulled from rubble before a demon could claim her soul. A guardsman whose regiment was spared from demonic possession through the Grey Knight's timely intervention. A world whose population was saved from corruption, even though they were subsequently sterilized and sent to work camps. These remembered individuals become a kind of private monument, a personal justification for the Grey Knight's continued service. In the lonely hours between deployments, when doubts creep in and the weight of anonymity becomes almost unbearable, the Grey Knight can recall these faces, these lives, and find renewed purpose in the knowledge that his actions, however unacknowledged, had real and tangible impact. But even this private comfort is tinged with sadness, for the Grey Knight knows that none of these people remember him. The child he saved has no memory of the silver-armored giant who pulled her from danger, the guardsman whose life he spared was mind-wiped, or died in a transport that was destroyed to prevent the spread of chaos knowledge. The world he saved no longer bears any record of the invasion he helped repel. His memories are one-sided, connections that exist only in his own mind. There is also the knowledge that eventual death, while guaranteed, will likely come in obscurity. A Grey Knight who falls in battle against demons dies surrounded by enemies who are themselves creatures of nightmare and madness. There are no witnesses to his final stand except his brothers, no record of his last moments beyond the battle reports filed in the chapter's archives. The manner of his death, no matter how heroic, will never be known beyond Titan's walls. Some Grey Knights have expressed, in private moments of contemplation, a wistful envy for the deaths of other space marines. A blood angel who falls in glorious combat, his final charge witnessed by thousands and recorded for posterity. An Imperial fist who dies defending a position against impossible odds, his sacrifice becoming legend among those he saved. Even a guardsman who gives his life in service to the Emperor can die knowing that his name will appear on a monument somewhere, that someone will remember he existed and honor his sacrifice. But a Grey Knight's death is swallowed by the same secrecy that shrouds his life. He dies unknown, unmourned except by his brothers, and even that mourning must remain confined to Titan. The wider Imperium will never know that he lived, never understand what he sacrificed, never have the opportunity to offer thanks or prayers or any of the normal human responses to heroic sacrifice. This burden is perhaps heaviest for those Grey Knights who rise to positions of leadership within the chapter. A brother captain commands 100 warriors, each one a hero in his own right, each one fighting battles that could determine the fate of worlds or even entire sectors. He makes decisions that preserve millions of lives, tactical choices that prevent demonic incursions from spreading beyond their initial manifestation. His wisdom and experience make him a priceless asset to the Imperium. But he will never be recorded in the Imperium's history books. His tactical brilliance will never be studied at the Schola Progenium. The battles he won will never be analyzed by future generations seeking to learn from his successes. Everything he accomplishes, all the knowledge and experience he accumulates over centuries of service, exists only within the chapter, shared among his brothers but hidden from the wider world. When such a warrior finally falls, when the inevitable day comes that even his transhuman physiology cannot overcome the wounds inflicted by demonic weapons, he dies knowing that his legacy will be entirely internal to the chapter. His name will be added to the walls of remembrance on Titan. His deeds will be spoken of in the chapter's halls, his tactical innovations passed down to future generations of Grey Knights. But beyond those walls, it will be as if he never existed. Some might argue that this is no different from the anonymous service of countless other imperial servants. The guardsman in the trenches, the factory worker toiling in the manufactorums, the scribe laboring over endless records in the administratum vaults. All of them serve the emperor in anonymity, their individual contributions lost in the vastness of the Imperium. Why should Grey Knights expect anything different? But the difference is one of scale and stakes. The guardsman's contribution to a campaign is real but limited. If one particular soldier falls, others will take his place, and the campaign continues. The Grey Knight's contribution is often decisive and irreplaceable. His intervention might be the only thing standing between a world and complete corruption by chaos. The guardsman dies knowing that he was part of something larger than himself, a cog in an immense military machine. The Grey Knight dies knowing that he was a singular weapon, wielded in secret against enemies that the Imperium cannot acknowledge exist. And yet, despite this burden, despite the loneliness and isolation and thanklessness of their service, the Grey Knights continue. They recruit new brothers, train them in the arts of demon slaying, and send them forth to fight battles that will never be celebrated. They develop new tactics and refine old ones, accumulate knowledge that serves only the narrow purpose of their sacred mission. They live and fight and die in the shadows, unknown heroes protecting an Imperium that cannot thank them for their service. This is perhaps the ultimate test of faith in the Emperor. To serve without expectation of reward or recognition. To fight for a cause, knowing that your contribution will be deliberately forgotten. It speaks to a depth of commitment that transcends normal human motivations, a purity of purpose that finds its own validation in service itself, rather than in any external acknowledgement of that service. The Grey Knights are heroes, but they are heroes who will never be celebrated. They are saviors, but they are saviors who must remain unknown. They are warriors whose greatest victories consist of ensuring that the Imperium remains ignorant of the battles they fought, and they carry this burden willingly, accepting the loneliness and isolation as necessary prices for the protection they provide. In the deep crypts of Titan, carved into basalt walls that no outsider will ever see, their names are preserved, their deeds are remembered by their brothers, their sacrifices are honored in ceremonies that will never be witnessed beyond the chapter's ranks. It is a small comfort, perhaps, but for those who have embraced the lonely burden of the unknown hero, it is enough. When the veil is lifted, the protocols surrounding the Grey Knight's secrecy, while absolute in their enforcement, are not without exceptions. There exist individuals and organizations within the Imperium who are permitted, even required, to know of the chapter's existence. These exceptions are carefully controlled and strictly limited, for each one represents a potential point of failure in the veil of secrecy that protects both the Grey Knights and the Imperium from the dangers that knowledge of chaos brings. The most obvious exception is the Inquisition itself. As the organization that the Grey Knights serve as chamber militant, the Inquisition necessarily knows of their existence and capabilities. But even within the Inquisition, knowledge is compartmentalized. Inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus, those who specialize in fighting demonic threats, work directly with the Grey Knights and understand their purpose and methods. But inquisitors of other ordos may know nothing more than rumors and speculation, whispers of a secretive chapter that appears when demons manifest and disappears just as mysteriously once the threat is eliminated. This compartmentalization serves multiple purposes. It protects the detailed knowledge of Grey Knight tactics and equipment from being compromised if an inquisitor falls to corruption. It prevents unnecessary spread of information about demonic threats to inquisitors whose focus lies elsewhere. And it maintains the principle that knowledge is shared only on a need-to-know basis, with each individual possessing only the information necessary to perform their specific duties. The highest echelons of Imperial leadership also know of the Grey Knight's existence, though the specifics of what they know varies. The High Lords of Terror, those 12 individuals who govern the Imperium in the Emperor's name, are aware that the chapter exists and generally understand its purpose. The Fabricator General of Mars knows, for the Adeptus Mechanicus maintains the Forge Moon Deimos in orbit around Titan, specifically to supply the Grey Knights with specialized equipment. The Ecclesiarch of the Adeptus Ministorum knows, though the relationship between the religious authorities and the demon hunters is complex and sometimes tense. Even among these highest authorities, however, detailed knowledge is limited. They may know that the Grey Knights exist to fight demons, but they do not know the specific rituals and tactics the chapter employs. They may know that the Grey Knights are based on Titan, but they do not know the layout of the fortress monastery or the contents of its libraries. They may know that certain operations required Grey Knight intervention, but they do not know the details of what occurred during those interventions. This creates a strange situation where the leaders of the Imperium are simultaneously aware of and ignorant about one of their most powerful weapons against chaos. They can authorize the requisition of resources for the Grey Knights, can approve strategic deployments when requested by the Ordo Malleus, can even issue broad policy directives that affect how the chapter operates. But they cannot observe the chapter directly, cannot inspect their facilities or demand detailed reports of their activities, cannot exercise the kind of direct oversight that they maintain over other imperial institutions. This independence is by design, built into the Grey Knight's founding charter by the Emperor and Malcador. The chapter answers only to the Ordo Malleus and, through them, to the Emperor himself. This makes them effectively autonomous, a force that operates outside the normal imperial hierarchy while still serving imperial interests. It also makes them vulnerable to accusations of having too much power with too little accountability, a concern that has led to occasional conflicts with other imperial authorities who feel that the Grey Knight's secrecy shields them from necessary scrutiny. Perhaps the most notable exception to the Grey Knight's secrecy are the Space Wolves. Following the months of shame, after Logan Grimnar had killed a Grey Knight Grand Master and nearly triggered a war between his chapter and the Inquisition, a compromise was reached. The Space Wolves would be allowed to retain knowledge of the Grey Knight's existence, becoming the only Space Marine chapter outside the Grey Knights themselves to officially know about the Daemon Hunters. This exception was granted reluctantly, and only after extensive debate within the Inquisition. Some argued that the space wolves had proven themselves too dangerous to be trusted with such knowledge, that their willingness to defy inquisitorial authority made them a security risk. Others pointed out that the space wolves were a first founding chapter with a long and loyal history, that they had fought alongside the Emperor himself during the Great Crusade, and that denying them knowledge while simultaneously demanding their cooperation would only create further conflict. The compromise that emerged allows the space wolves to know that the Grey Knights exist and to remember encounters with them. But the knowledge is limited to the chapter itself. Individual space wolves are not permitted to speak of the Grey Knights to outsiders, and they are sworn to secrecy regarding the details of any joint operations. This creates a curious situation where the space wolves as an organization are read into the secret, but must maintain that secret as carefully as the Grey Knights themselves do. The relationship between the two chapters remains complex and sometimes tense. The space wolves have never fully forgiven the Inquisition for the purges on Armageddon, and by extension, they harbor suspicions about the Grey Knights who participated in those purges. The Grey Knights, for their part, view the space wolves as a necessary but uncomfortable exception to the rules of secrecy that normally govern their operations. When the two chapters fight together, which happens more often than one might expect given their fraught history, there is professional respect, but also a careful wariness on both sides. There are also individuals who learn of the Grey Knights through accident or circumstance, and whose continued survival is permitted because they prove too valuable to eliminate or mind-wipe. High-ranking military commanders who have fought alongside the Grey Knights and demonstrated both tactical brilliance and incorruptibility might be allowed to retain their memories, bound by oaths of secrecy and constant inquisitorial oversight. Rogue traders, whose routes bring them into contact with Grey Knight operations, might be permitted to keep their knowledge in exchange for providing logistical support and maintaining absolute discretion. These exceptions are rare and granted only after extensive investigation and deliberation. The Inquisition must be absolutely certain that the individual in question is both incorruptible and capable of maintaining secrecy under all circumstances. This often requires psychic examination, background investigations going back generations, and the establishment of monitoring systems that will detect any breach of confidence. Even then, individuals who know of the Grey Knights, while not being part of the Inquisition or the chapter itself, live under constant scrutiny, their every action watched for signs of compromise or betrayal. There is also the question of what happens when Grey Knights themselves leave active service. While the chapter has never had a member fall to chaos, there have been occasions when battle damage has left a warrior unable to continue fighting. Unlike other Space Marine chapters that might place such warriors in positions of chapter administration or training, the Grey Knights cannot allow their members to retire to roles where they might come into contact with outsiders who should not know of the chapter's existence. Instead, severely wounded Grey Knights, who can no longer fight, are typically interred in dreadnought chassis, ancient walking tombs that allow the warrior's consciousness to survive and continue serving the chapter even after his body has been destroyed. This serves multiple purposes. It preserves the warrior's knowledge and experience, prevents the loss of his gene seed, and ensures that he remains within the chapter's controlled environment where he cannot accidentally compromise secrecy protocols. For those few Grey Knights who cannot be interred in dreadnoughts, but also cannot return to active service, the options are grimmer. Some choose to enter the Chambers of Purity, taking on roles as custodians of the chapter's most dangerous artifacts and forbidden texts. Others might become instructors, training new recruits in the arts of demon slaying while remaining sequestered on Titan. In the most extreme cases, when a warrior's injuries have left him diminished both physically and mentally, euthanasia might be considered the kindest option, ensuring that his knowledge dies with him rather than potentially being compromised. These exceptions to the veil of secrecy are carefully managed and strictly limited, but they are also necessary. The Grey Knights cannot operate in complete isolation. They require support from other imperial institutions, coordination with other military forces, and at least minimal oversight from the highest levels of imperial government. The challenge is to maintain enough transparency to allow for this cooperation while preserving enough secrecy to protect both the chapter and the Imperium from the dangers that full knowledge would bring. It is a delicate balance, constantly maintained through vigilance and ruthless enforcement of protocols. When the veil is lifted, it is done with extreme care, with full awareness of the risks involved, and with constant monitoring to ensure that the knowledge granted does not spread beyond its intended recipients. And even those who are permitted to know, even those few exceptions to the rule of absolute secrecy, understand that they have been burdened with dangerous knowledge that must be guarded as carefully as the Grey Knights guard their fortress on Titan. The price of humanity's protection. We have travelled through the history of the Grey Knights, from their secret founding in the dying days of the Horus Heresy to their continued service in the dark present of the 41st Millennium. We have examined the reasons for their secrecy from every angle, the corruption that knowledge of chaos brings, the tactical advantages of invisibility, the protection of their unique gene seed, the preservation of specialized techniques and equipment. We have seen the terrible costs of this secrecy, the billions purged on Armageddon, the loneliness of warriors who fight and die unknown, the difficult exceptions that must be made when the veil of ignorance cannot be maintained. Now, at the end of this exploration, we must ask the fundamental question that has lurked beneath every discussion of protocols and purges, beneath every examination of gene seed and tactical doctrine. Is it worth it? Does the protection that the Grey Knights provide, bought at such terrible cost, justify the measures taken to keep them secret? The answer depends on what we believe about the nature of chaos and the fragility of human souls. If we accept the premise that knowledge of demons is inherently corrupting, that even witnessing a demonic manifestation creates a connection between the witness's soul and the warp that can never be fully severed, then the secrecy protocols make terrible sense. Every mind-wiping, every execution, every exterminatus becomes a tragic necessity, a smaller evil accepted to prevent a vastly greater one. Under this view, the Grey Knights are not merely warriors fighting chaos, but firefighters containing a conflagration of the soul. When a demonic incursion occurs, it is not enough to banish the demons and declare victory. The very knowledge that demons existed in that place, the memories carried by witnesses, the spiritual taint that lingers in the air, all of these things represent fuel for future corruption. The mind-wipings and executions are not punishments or acts of cruelty, but quarantine measures, the removal of infected tissue before it can spread disease to the healthy body of the Imperium. From this perspective, the billions who died in the Armageddon purges were already dead the moment they witnessed demons manifesting on their world. Not physically dead, perhaps, but spiritually compromised, carrying within them seeds of corruption that would inevitably grow if not removed. The Inquisition's decision to execute them or sterilize them and send them to work camps was not murder, but triage, a brutal calculation that weighed certain death for millions against probable corruption and death for billions or trillions. But there is another view, one that the Space Wolves and others have argued with increasing frequency, that the cure has become worse than the disease, that the Imperium's paranoid secrecy around chaos creates more problems than it solves, that perhaps humanity would be stronger if it understood the nature of the threats it faces. This argument points out that knowledge of chaos does not inevitably lead to corruption. The Grey Knights themselves are proof of this, as are the Inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus, and even those rare imperial citizens who have encountered demons and survived without falling to corruption. If some humans can resist, why not educate more people about the nature of chaos? Teach them how to recognize corruption and resist it. Create a population that is spiritually fortified rather than deliberately kept ignorant. The counter to this argument is that the Grey Knights and Inquisitors who can resist corruption are exceptional, carefully selected and extensively trained individuals who represent a tiny fraction of humanity. To try to educate the wider population would mean exposing billions of people to dangerous knowledge. Knowing that even if 99% of them successfully resist corruption, that remaining 1% represents millions of potential vectors for chaos to enter the material realm. There is also the question of whether ignorance truly protects. The imperial policy of denying the existence of chaos means that when citizens do encounter it, they are unprepared and vulnerable. They do not recognize the early signs of corruption, do not know how to resist demonic influence, cannot even properly report what they are experiencing because they lack the vocabulary and conceptual framework to describe it. This ignorance might make them less attractive targets for chaos initially, but it makes them much more vulnerable once they do become targets. The Grey Knights exist in the middle of this impossible dilemma. They are the weapon forged to fight an enemy that most of humanity cannot know exists. They are the secret guardians standing watch against threats that the Imperium officially denies. They enforce protocols that seem barbaric in their cruelty, yet serve purposes that might be essential to humanity's survival. The truth is that we cannot know, with absolute certainty, whether the secrecy is necessary or excessive. We cannot run the experiment of telling the entire Imperium about chaos and seeing what happens, because, if the current policy is correct, that experiment would doom humanity. We cannot be sure that the billions executed in purges would actually have become corrupted, because they were killed before that corruption could manifest. We operate in a realm of terrible uncertainties, making life and death decisions based on incomplete information and theories about the nature of souls and corruption that cannot be definitively proven. What we can say with certainty is that the Grey Knights believe their secrecy is necessary, believe it so strongly that they have accepted its costs for 10,000 years without wavering. They have watched billions die to protect their secret, have lived lives of complete anonymity, have given up everything that normal humans value in pursuit of a mission they believe is essential to humanity's survival. That belief might be mistaken, but it is sincere, and the sacrifice it represents is real and terrible. We can also say that the system, however cruel it appears, has functioned. The Imperium endures. Chaos has not claimed the galaxy, has not corrupted all of humanity, has not achieved the total victory that the ruinous powers surely desire. Whether this is because of the Grey Knight's secrecy or despite it, we cannot know. But the correlation exists, and in the absence of certainty, correlation must serve as evidence. Perhaps the deepest tragedy of the Grey Knights is not the secrecy itself, but the necessity of it. In a saner galaxy, in a universe where knowledge was not dangerous, and souls were not vulnerable to corruption merely from awareness of evil, the Grey Knights could be celebrated as the heroes they are. Their deeds could inspire generations, their sacrifices could be honored, their victories could be recorded in history for all humanity to learn from. But we do not live in that galaxy. We live in a place where knowledge kills, where awareness corrupts, where the act of knowing an enemy's name gives that enemy power over you. We live in a reality where the greatest service one can offer to humanity might be to suffer and die in obscurity, protecting people who will never know they were in danger, fighting battles that history will never record. The Grey Knights are forbidden from speaking of their missions because the galaxy is fundamentally, irredeemably hostile to the very concept of transparent knowledge. They serve in silence because silence is the only shield that can protect both them and those they guard. They accept loneliness and anonymity and thanklessness because the alternative might be the corruption and destruction of everything they fight to preserve. This is the price of humanity's protection, that those who provide it must remain unknown, that victories against chaos must be hidden as carefully as defeats, that knowledge which might strengthen some would doom many, that the warriors who stand between humanity and damnation must do so in shadows so deep that even their own sacrifices cannot be properly acknowledged. Whether this price is worth paying, whether the cost in lives and freedom and human dignity justifies the protection it allegedly provides. Each person must judge for themselves. But we should remember, as we make that judgment, that we make it from a position of relative safety, protected by the very secrecy we might question, guarded by warriors whose names we will never know and whose sacrifices we can never properly honor. The Grey Knights are forbidden from speaking of their missions, and perhaps, in a galaxy as dark as ours, that silence is the only way any of us get to speak at all. If you enjoyed learning about the hidden warriors who protect humanity from its darkest nightmares, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are countless more secrets hidden in the grim darkness of the far future, and we'll continue exploring them together, one forbidden truth at a time.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.